You don't need to worry about the ovarian hormones, those produced by the ovaries, and the testicular hormones, those produced by the testes, on this test. But a week from Thursday, which will be our last lab test, then you'll be tested on those hormones, produced by the ovaries and testes, plus a couple additional ones associated with early embryonic development and the menstrual cycle. Okay? So for now, everything on page 1 and 2, and the top of page 3, through melatonin, your responsible on Thursday's lab test. Okay? And then next Thursday, our last lab test, those associated with ovaries and testes, plus a couple additional ones. Then don't throw your sheet away, because I'm also going to test you on all these hormones, plus a couple additional ones, on the lecture plan, which will be 2 weeks from tomorrow, July the 3rd. That'll be our very last meeting. Okay? So you have ample opportunity to learn these hormones and do it. Because again, you're going to be tested on it a couple times, and also on the lecture plan. Okay? That'll be a good part of the lecture plan, is hormones. All right, so learn where these hormones are produced, and not just the organ, but also the tissues or cells that produce the hormone, and what is their action, which is listed here on this sheet. And sometimes you see they have more than one action. Okay, on your lab objective sheet then, on page 14, bottom of the page where it says functional anatomy of endocrine glands. You can follow along as we go through this. We're going to start with the thyroid gland. What you're looking at here is the thyroid. Now, the thyroid is very distinguishable, but again, most of the slides will be label exposed, so you know exactly which gland you're looking at. But I'm not going to ask what's the gland. I'm going to say, what are these cells? Or what are these tissues? And what do they produce? Thyroid is very distinct because it's full of these, what are called follicles, thyroid follicles. That's what you're looking at here. They're roughly spherical. Now, not all have been cut in the same place. That's why some are larger than others, but roughly spherical. But this is not a cell. This is a multicellular structure. So this is called the thyroid follicle, not a follicle cell. And these little dots that you see here, these are the nuclei of the follicle cells. So the follicle cells make up the wall of the follicle. So again, if I point to this, don't call it a follicle cell. This is the follicle. The follicle cells actually make up the wall of the follicle. That's what you see here. These little dots that you see are the nuclei of the follicle cells. And they produce some important hormones, T3 and T4. And by the way, you may use the appropriate abbreviation when I'm asking for the hormones. So you can say triiodothyronine and pyroxine, or you can simply put capital T subscript 3, capital T subscript 4. Either is acceptable, as long as you don't make something up of your own. All right? You can use the abbreviations. So these cells, follicle cells, secrete the hormones T3 and T4 in the interior of the follicle. And there it's stored in complex with a protein colloid. That protein colloid is called thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin. That's on your handout there, your lab objective sheet. And these hormones that are stored here until needed, and then they're released directly into the blood. Now, what do T3 and T4 do? They regulate your basal metabolic rate. In other words, the rate at which you burn calories. So very important in regulating the basal metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn calories. These hormones are listed at the bottom of the first page of your hormone handout. See there, triiodothyronine and thyroxine, T3 and T4. So basically, this is your oxygen use, your cellular metabolism, also your breakdown of fats and carbohydrates, protein synthesis, even growth and development. So very important hormones, T3 and T4. They regulate a lot of things going on in the body. Your basal metabolic rate. As we get older, a lot of people have problems with thyroid hormone. Either they produce too much, hyperthyroidism, or too little, hypothyroidism. If they produce too little, what happens is the metabolic rate slows down appreciably. They tend to put on a lot of weight. The heart rate slows. They have trouble thermoregulating. They're freezing all the time. Basically, they're not generating the ketones are breaking down. They're using the calories. So what they basically do is they put you on a synthetic thyroid hormone the rest of your life. If you're hyperthyroid, you're producing too much, and what they first usually do is they give you a thyroid hormone antagonist, which basically reduces thyroid production by the thyroid hormone production by the thyroid. If that doesn't work, then they either surgically remove the thyroid, or they zap it with a radioisotope, I-131, in which case you become a pariah. You have to stay away from other people, particularly children, because you're radiating, and you can destroy the thyroid of other people.
Wow.
So you can't be around children, you can't be hugging children, you can't be close to them. It will tell you basically just go away from your family for a while. Especially if you take a room in a motel, you should sleep separately, okay? Use separate utensils, glassware, dishes, and so on. Have separate bedding and so on.
Wow.
Because there's a risk of damaging thyroid of other people.
Now, is that for the rest of that person's life or no?
What? Not for the rest of your life, but for a period of time, several weeks, usually. Because eventually the hormone dissipates. Okay, or not the hormone, the radioisotope. But for a while you're radiating. Okay, and you can zap other thyroids, especially in children. Very dangerous. Yes.
What did you say about the thyroglobulin?
What did I say about it?
Yeah, I didn't hear you.
I said, what does it do?
I heard you say the word, but not what it.
I said it regulates your basal metabolic rate. If you're overactive, then what happens is your basal metabolic rate increases, you burn calories very quickly.
That's the thyroglobulin?
No, thyroglobulin is the protein colloid here in the thyroid follicles. And that's where the T3 and T4 is stored, in complex with the protein. Okay? Anyway, in hyperthyroidism, your rate goes up, you're burning calories much faster. Again, you have trouble thermoregulating because you are basically hot all the time. Your metabolic rate is so hot. You may think that's great, I can lose weight, you know, but it's not so great because it can put your heart in tachycardia, and at that precision, you go into fibrillation. So, like I say, you basically have to destroy the thyroid or reduce its production, and then they take out the thyroid surgically or destroy it, then you're on thyroid hormone supplements the rest of your life. So either process is very good. But unfortunately, a lot of people, as they get older, have problems with thyroid. Either too much thyroid hormone or too little. Okay. And iodine, because iodine is used by the thyroid to make these hormones, T3 and T4. So what they'll often do too is when they put you on the thyroid hormone antagonist, they'll say, don't eat foods that are high in iodine, which means shellfish, shrimp, crab, crayfish, lobster, all these things a lot of people like, because they're high in iodine. All right, there's another type of cell here, which you can see right here. Now these cells are called parafollicular cells, and they're between the follicles. You can see adjacent follicles here, where the follicle cells are producing T3 and T4. These produce another hormone called calcitonin. Again, these cells are called parafollicular cells, or sometimes C cells, because in some animals they are kind of clear, not in humans. But parafollicular cells, the hormone they produce, calcitonin. And be careful, this is not calcitriol. Calcitriol is vitamin D, produced by the kidneys. Calcitonin is produced by these cells. Now what it does is to elevate calcium ion levels in the blood. It inhibits osteoclast activity. Remember when you were studying the bones? Osteoclasts are the cells that chew up the inorganic bone matrix. So by inhibiting osteoclast activity, you deposit more calcium salts in the bone matrix. And that brings up your calcium ion levels. So again, the hormone is calcitonin, produced by these cells, parathyroid cells, in the thyroid. Okay? Yes, question or you just?
Oh, no.
Okay. Now, also in close proximity of the thyroid is the parathyroid. which looks distinctly different. This is parathyroid. See, the thyroid has all these follicles. The parathyroid looks rather glandular, rather granular in appearance. That's because the nuclei are the major cell type in the parathyroid. Parathyroid are little lobes of tissue sort of surrounded by thyroid tissue, but they have a distinctly different function. The cells here, unfortunately, are called chief cells. Where do we see chief cells before? In the gastric glands of the stomach, remember, and they produce the enzymes. So unfortunately, these are also called chief cells. They produce parathyroid hormone, which is kind of nice. Parathyroid gland, parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone lowers calcium ion levels in the blood. It does that by stimulating osteoclast activity, which basically chews up some of the calcium salts and puts calcium salts into the blood. It encourages the kidneys to take up more calcium ions, reclaim it from the renal filtrate. It also stimulates the kidneys to produce calcitriol, vitamin D, and vitamin D, as you know, is needed for absorption of calcium. So the net effect is to build up the calcium ion levels in the blood, parathyroid hormone. So it has the opposite effect of calcitonin. And again, the cells that produce that are these. What you're looking at are the nuclei of these cells, chief cells. But there are also some other types of cells in here too. They're few and far between, and it looks like there are little spaces here because these cells are a little bit larger. These are called oxaphyll cells. These are oxaphyll cells. Function? I don't know. So, this is one place where you can say function unknown. If I ask you to function of oxaphyll cells, don't put a line through the blank and don't put a question mark. Indicate you know, I don't know what the function is. Right? So you can get away with it here, not having a red line through the answer. Right? Function unknown.
Wow.
Oxaphyll cells. You can do that one other place too, but only two places. Right? So that's for the function of oxaphyll cells, function unknown. Okay? But the chief cells again produce parathyroid hormone, the function of which is to elevate calcium ion levels in the blood.
Lower? Elevated.
I'm sorry, elevate, yeah, elevate.
The
As I said.
parathyroid?
Parathyroid elevates calcium ion levels. The calcitonin lowers.
Oh.
I mean, excuse me.
Will you point out again the oxaphyll cells before you get off that slide?
All right, right here. These cells here.
They look like they're blurred.
Yeah, it looks like there's no nucleus in here.
Yeah,
They're bigger
that's what
cells.
I had.
Okay.
So how do they come up with a name for the cell if they don't know what it does?
I don't know. I don't know where the name came from. Maybe they love oxygen. Oxaphyll. Anyway, again, calcitonin, that's produced by the parafollicular cell in the thyroid, and again, this lowers calcium ion levels in the blood, and parathyroid elevates calcium ion levels in the blood. Okay, you clear on that? Parathyroid elevates calcium ion levels. Calcitonin lowers calcium ion levels in the blood. Okay, let's take a look at another endocrine organ. This is called the pituitary. Now the pituitary is attached to the brain, as you probably know. You did a brain dissection in A&P1, and you took the dura mater off the brain. You probably took the pituitary gland with it. Because there's only a thin stalk of tissue that attaches the pituitary to the hypothalamus of the brain. That's called the infundibulum. The pituitary gland is sometimes called the master gland or the master endocrine gland. And that's because some of the hormones it produces stimulate the release of hormones by other endocrine organs. Now there are several regions. I want you to know the two major regions of the pituitary gland. Another name for the pituitary gland is hypophysis. So if you see the term hypophysis, that means pituitary gland. This is the posterior part of the pituitary gland. And because it's mostly neurotissue, it's called the neurohypophysis. another name for it. So this is posterior pituitary. You can see it looks distinctly different than the anterior pituitary, which is glandular. And that's called the adenohypophysis. So again, anterior pituitary, adenohypophysis, it consists of glandular tissue that produces hormones. Posterior pituitary, the neurohypophysis, this stores hormones that are actually produced by neurons of the hypothalamus, but released and stored here. So let's go over these. We're first going to look at the posterior pituitary. Now, most of the cells you see here, and all these little nuclei you see here, are not those of neurons, but those of glial cells. In AP1, I'm sure you talked about neuroglia or glial cells. You probably know there are 6 different types, 4 of which are confined to the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. The other 2 in the peripheral nervous system. Okay. You're experts on that now, so we won't go over it. But these glial cells here have a fancy name. They're called pituocytes. Okay, what they are glial cells here in the posterior pituitary. Pituocytes. And again, that's on your handout. Under pituitary. Everybody see that? That's under posterior pituitary, which is right at the bottom of page 14. But again, the hormones that are associated with posterior pituitary are not produced by these cells. They're produced by hypothalamic neurons, neurons extending down from the hypothalamus. Now, I should say axons, okay? And remember, the nucleus of a neuron is not in the axon. Where is it located? In the cell body, okay? The nucleus of the neuron is in the cell body, not in the dendrites, which is the process that carry impulses to the cell body, and not in the axon, which carries it away, okay? But it's axons of these neurons coming from the hypothalamus that actually produce the hormones associated with the posterior pituitary. And there are 2. And I've listed them there on your handout. If you look under posterior pituitary, okay, that's toward the bottom of the first page. Oxytocin is one. Oxytocin stimulates smooth muscle contraction. It's very important in labor and delivery, because it stimulates uterine muscle contraction to basically push the baby out of the body of the mother on a regular delivery, vaginal delivery. It also has another important function. It stimulates milk letdown by the breasts. It does not stimulate milk production, that's another hormone, but it stimulates the release of milk from the breast shortly after birth. So oxytocin stimulates smooth muscle contraction and also stimulates milk letdown by the breast. And sometimes when women have a very labored delivery, or she's in labor for a long period of time, they'll give her Pitocin, which is an artificial form of this hormone, to accelerate the smooth muscle contraction and aid in the delivery. So Pitocin basically is a form of oxytocin. Okay, so that's one of the hormones produced by neurons of the hypothalamus, released and stored here, and then released from the posterior pituitary into the blood. The other one we've talked quite a bit about already, and that hormone is called ADH, anti-diuretic hormone. I think you already know what that does. It stimulates the kidneys to reclaim more water, build up the blood volume, and thus build up the blood pressure. Anti-diuretic hormone. In other words, it opposes diuresis, which is urine formation. It's also called, notice, vasopressin, because it itself is a potent vasoconstrictor. It stimulates smooth muscle contraction in the walls of the arterioles, which right away brings up the blood pressure. And when you have a severe blood loss or hemorrhage, your body dumps a lot of ADH in the blood. What that does is help to maintain blood pressure. Because with hemorrhage, what's going to happen? You've lost blood volume, blood pressure drops. If it's too low, you'll get it up to the brain. You collapse on unconsciousness, common death. So this is basically a way to maintain blood pressure and make sure you get enough blood up to the brain. So it's also vasopressin, because it's a vasoconstrictor. Okay? So again, these two hormones, oxytocin stimulating smooth muscle contraction and milk letdown, and ADH stimulating reclamation by the kidneys of water and thus building up blood volume and blood pressure, both produced by neurons of the hypothalamus and released here into the posterior pituitary, and then released from here into the blood. Okay, the other part of the pituitary I want you to know is the anterior pituitary. As I said, this is glandular. We have cells here that actually produce the hormones and release them into the blood. So again, this is called the adenohypophysis. Now there are two major cell types here, which I'd like you to be able to identify. And you can distinguish them based on the color or the stain on their cytoplasm. Not the nucleus, but the cytoplasm. And we can see here, the cells that have kind of a pink stained cytoplasm, these are called acidophil cells. The other cells with a purple, this dark purple cytoplasm, again, not the nucleus, but the cytoplasm, these are called basophil cells. I don't call them basophils. They're not white blood cells. They're basophil cells, specific cells in the anterior pituitary. And they produce, as you might expect, different hormones. So let's look first at the hormones produced by the acidophil cells, the ones with the pink cytoplasm. You can see on your hormone handout there, top of the first page, okay, under pituitary where it says anterior pituitary, growth hormone is one, also called human growth hormone. As the name suggests, this is involved in stimulating growth, but indirectly. What it actually does is stimulate release of what are called insulin-like growth factors by the liver, bone, muscle. It's those that actually directly stimulate growth. So in other words, protein synthesis, tissue repair, and so on. So growth hormone released by these acidophil cells stimulates the release of these growth enhancing factors, insulin-like growth factors. Okay? But there's an underproduction of growth hormone during childhood and adolescence, of course. The child is much shorter than normal. Very severe to be a midget. So if it's extensive overproduction, then the child gets very tall and end up being a giant, basically. Hopefully somewhere in between. Sometimes short children, parents say, oh, you know, want to play basketball, you know, do this, and why are they so short? So they can basically stimulate them with growth hormone. Okay? If there's an overproduction of growth hormone after both, or after growth in the skeleton has ceased, i.e. growth in length, okay? Not this way, but this way, okay? Then you have another condition, that's called acromegaly. It stimulates growth of certain bones, they get bigger and thicker, but that's not really what you want. Because what happens is you get a very large jaw, the mandible expands, you get very prominent jaw or brow ridges, and the skull almost gets the appearance of kind of gorilla-like. You also have very large growth of the bones of the fingers and toes, so they becoming large. And of course, in the hand, that reduces manual dexterity. And to make matters worse, you get enlargement of certain organs, like the tongue is larger than normal, maybe internal organs also enlarge. And with a large tongue, it makes it difficult to speak clearly, because the tongue is so big. So this is not really a nice condition. That's called acromegaly, and it's growth of certain bones, or enlargement of certain bones, after growth, oppositional growth, or growth in length basically ceased.
Do they live a normal lifespan?
Often not. You know, they may not live as long as another person, but
Because I've never seen one.
well, it's not real common, but sometimes it does occur. Again, it's called acromegaly. And you see pictures, you see, you show the face, and the face is really distorted. It's very enlarged, and obviously it looks like there's something wrong. Okay, so that's growth hormone. The other hormone produced by these cells is called prolactin. And the name tells you what it does. It promotes lactation. In other words, it promotes milk formation by cells in the mammary glands. Oxytocin stimulates milk release, but prolactin stimulates milk production. And again, this is another hormone produced by acidophil cells. So prolactin and human growth hormone are the two hormones produced by these cells, acidophil cells, and released into the blood. Okay, the basophil cells you see here, at the dark purple cytoplasm. not the nucleus, but the cytoplasm. These produce a wealth of hormones, and for the most part, they're hormones that stimulate the production of hormones by other endocrine glands. So they're called stimulating hormones. For example, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH for short. As the name suggests, this stimulates production of the thyroid hormones by the thyroid glands. Again, you can use these abbreviations, capital T, capital S, capital H. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Another important hormone released by the basophil cells is FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone. This stimulates growth and development of the follicles in the ovary. Now, follicles are a multi-cell structure in the ovary of females within which a single egg cell develops. This is not an egg cell, okay? Egg cells are developing, single cells developing within the follicle. The follicle is a multi-cell structure. We'll go into this in more detail when we talk about the reproductive system next week, okay? So follicle stimulating hormone stimulates growth of these follicles, and also production by these follicles of female sex hormones, particularly estrogens, major female sex hormone. Now, of course, males also produce FSH. They have no follicles. So what it does in males is stimulate production of the male gametes, the sperm. So in males, it stimulates sperm production by the testes.
So the basophil cells are the purple, dark shading ones.
Right, the acidophil cells, these dark cytoplasmic cells. Okay?
Oh, we're not on basophils then. Basophil cells.
Well, these are basophils.
Okay, I thought you said acidophil.
No, acidophil is prolactin and human growth hormone.
Yes, okay.
So we're talking about basophils.
All right.
Thyroid stimulating hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Another one is called luteinizing hormone, LH for short. This stimulates continued production by the follicles of estrogens plus progesterone, another female sex hormone. It also triggers ovulation, the release of the egg from the follicle, which occurs in human females roughly once a month, as you know, part of the menstrual cycle. In males, of course, again, we're not dealing with follicles, so what it does in males, it stimulates production of male sex hormones, primarily testosterone, by cells in the testes called interstitial cells. So this hormone is also called interstitial cell stimulating hormone. And I'll mention that again when we talk about the testes next week, the reproductive system. Okay? So, the sex organs in humans produce not only the gametes, egg and sperm cells, but also the sex hormones. Estrogen, progesterone in females, and testosterone in males. Okay, we've got another hormone produced by these cells called melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH for short. These again are the basophil cells, and that stimulates melanin production by the melanocytes in the epidermis of your skin. That's what gives color to our skin, our hair, and the iris of our eyes. We all produce melanin. The more you produce, the darker. The darker the skin, the hair, and the eyes. The only people that don't produce melanin are albinos. And their skin is snow white, their hair is snow white, and the iris of their eyes appears red. Because you don't have any pigment to basically mask the blood flow in the iris. And you've seen albino animals, like albino mice and rats and rabbits and so on like that. Okay. All right, there's another hormone produced by these basophil cells, and that's called ACTH, which stands for adrenal corticotropic hormone. This stimulates release by the cortex of the adrenal glands of some special hormones, which are referred to as glucocorticoids and androgens, which are male sex hormones. And by the way, they're produced by both sexes. We'll talk about that when we get to the adrenal glands. Okay. So again, these are hormones basically that stimulate production of hormones by other endocrine glands, those released by the basophils. Okay. Any questions? All right, there's a third cell type here. It's not as common as the basophils and acidophils, but they are here. And these cells are called chromophobes. chrome or chroma refers to color, phobe means fury, okay? And here's one right here. These cells have a prominent nucleus, you can see here, and they usually have an unstained cytoplasm, or it appears somewhat gray. They don't like the color, chromophobe. Function, unknown. So here's a second place where you can use that to get away with it. Function unknown. So the oxaphyll cells of the parathyroid glands, function unknown, and the chromophobes of the anterior pituitary, function unknown. Those are the only two places where you can say that and not have a red line through your answer. Okay? So function unknown. Okay, let's look at another endocrine organ. We've looked at the thyroid, the parathyroid, and the pituitary. Let's look now at the pancreas again. Now we looked at the pancreas before, the digestive system, and remember that most of pancreas is made up of exocrine cells. And what do exocrine cells produce?
Insulin, glucagon, and glucagon.
Exocrine cells, not endocrine.
Um,
They're the cells that produce the digestive enzymes.
Oh.
Exocrine means you got a duct associated with the gland that carries the secretion. In this case, exocrine cells produce, for the most part, digestive enzymes rather, that are carried by pancreatic ducts into the small intestine for digestion of your food. But we also have endocrine tissue. And the endocrine tissue are called the pancreatic islets, or islets of Langerhans. And they're the cells here are the ones that produce the hormones. You already know two of the hormones. What are they?
Insulin and
Glucagon and insulin. And what does insulin do?
lowers blood sugar.
It lowers glucose levels in the blood. It encourages cells to take up glucose and form glycogen. So it's lowering glucose levels. And glucagon, what does glucagon do?
Increases the
It raises glucose levels in the blood by encouraging the breakdown of glycogen and releases glucose into the blood.
That surely doesn't look like the pancreas we saw before.
Pardon me?
It doesn't look like the same pancreas.
No, it does not. It's
the-
stained. It is stained differently to show the different cell types, which I'm going to ask you to pick out. That's why. So enjoy the color, okay?
Yay.
All right. This, which appears kind of reddish, we're talking about the nuclei, which are all red, the cytoplasm. This is a pancreatic islet, or islet of Langerhans. This is the hormone-producing part of the pancreas. Out here are your exocrine cells that produce the digestive enzymes and release their secretions into the pancreatic ducts, which carry them to the small intestine for digestion. Okay. The major cell type here is kind of a red or violet color cytoplasm. Those are called beta cells. It's the beta cells that produce insulin. We've already talked about what insulin does. So these reddish stained cytoplasm cells, which are most abundant in here, are called beta cells, and they produce the insulin. Okay?
Which are the islands? Not
These
the red.
reddish.
The red?
Yeah, the red area here, that's the pancreatic islet.
Okay.
Okay? And again, the major cell type here are the beta cells. All right, the second most abundant cell type are brown. You've got a brown cytoplasm, as you see here. Those are called alpha cells, and they produce glucagon. Again, we already talked about glucagon as well. So beta cells, the most abundant cells, have kind of a reddish or rose pink cytoplasm. The beta cells have a brown cytoplasm. The alpha cells. The third cell type is much less abundant. These are called delta cells. The delta cells have a very light tan cytoplasm, not the nucleus, but the cytoplasm. They're not as abundant as the other two types. There's also one up here. These cells produce somatostatin, another hormone. Remember we mentioned somatostatin? Produced by cells in the gastric glands. The so-called enteroendocrine cells concentrate at the base of gastric glands. I told you those cells produce what? What was the major hormone those cells produce in the stomach?
Gastrin inhibitor?
Gastrin.
Gastrin.
Gastrin. What does gastrin do? Stimulates release of gastric juice, secretion of the parietal and chief cells, and also stimulates stomach motility, contraction of smooth muscle in the muscularis externa, the stomach wall. Causes a turning action of the stomach and also evacuation of the stomach, movement of food from the stomach into the small intestine. Also told you that these same cells can also produce somatostatin. So here we are again. It's the delta cells, okay? These were kind of a light brown cytoplasm, as you see here, kind of tan colored, that also produce somatostatin. Now, soma means body. Statin means basically stop or hold in check. What this does is basically stop the secretion of many other glands in the body, including the secretion by the alpha and beta cells of insulin and glucagon. It also inhibits secretion of gastric juice, various pancreatic enzymes, and so on. So it basically shuts down secretion of a lot of things.
Could you point it out again, delta cells?
Delta cells are these tan cytoplasm cells. There's one right here, not the nucleus, but the light brown or tan cytoplasm. One right here, okay, there's one right there, okay. They're not as abundant, there's one right here, okay, as opposed to the brown, okay, the brown cytoplasm is in alpha cells.
And the smaller looks like?
So
The delta are?
delta are like a tan, very light brown, versus the darker brown of these cells, which are the alpha cells. Okay? And again, these hormones are listed there for you, okay, under pancreatic, right, hormones, and this will be at the base, or bottom rather, of page 2. Okay, so somatostatin again. And by the way, it also inhibits growth hormone release, so it's also called growth hormone inhibiting hormone, somatostatin. So it basically shuts down secretion of glucagon, insulin, secretion of growth hormone, secretion of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, secretion of stomach hormones and enzymes, okay, secretion of bile by the liver, and so on. All right, there's a fourth type of cell which I do not expect you to pick out. They're few and far between. These are called F cells, like the letter F. And these produce another hormone called pancreatic polypeptide. And pancreatic polypeptide shuts down the secretion, or inhibits the secretion, of somatostatin. So it basically shuts down the somatostatin. Pancreatic polypeptide produced by a fourth type of cell called F cells. Again, you don't have to pick those out. They'll ask, what's another cell type? Or what does it produce? F cells producing pancreatic polypeptide. Okay, so the four cells. Those pink ones, cytoplasm again, beta cells producing insulin. The brown cytoplasm cells, second most abundant. Alpha cells produce glucagon. Then third in abundance, these light brown or tan cells, you can see here, here, and so on, okay? These are the delta cells producing somatostatin, and then the F cells you don't see here, but they're the ones that produce pancreatic polypeptide. Okay? And here again, maybe you can see, looks a little better, the color. You can see it's reddish, it's more red here. These are the pancreatic islets or islets glomeruli. See, there's another one right here. Okay, there's another one up here. But the majority of the cells, they're kind of brown here in the cytoplasm. Those are the exocrine cells, which for the most part produce digestive enzymes. Okay. Any questions? Okay, let's take a look at the adrenal glands, and these are adjacent to the kidneys. Okay. Adrenal means next to the kidneys. Now, the adrenal glands, like a lot of glands, have a connective tissue membrane around them. or to protect. That's what this is. And this is called the adrenal capsule. Again, it's not unique to the adrenal glands. We've seen it on the kidneys, lymph nodes, spleen, etc., etc. But that's the adrenal capsule. The gland itself is divided into an outer region, which is called the cortex. That's what this is. This is all cortex. And then the inner region, which you see right here, which is the medulla. Like we see in a lot of organs. The outer part is often called the cortex, inner part the medulla. Now the medulla has a lot of blood vessels, you can see. And this produces hormones that are probably the best known ones associated with the adrenal gland. What used to be called adrenaline, now called epinephrine, and noradrenaline, now called norepinephrine, are produced by cells in the medulla, and they have a fancy name. They're called chromatin cells. Of course, the hormones that are released directly into the blood. The function of these hormones, and again, epinephrine and norepinephrine basically do the same thing. Chemically, they're essentially very similar, and their effect basically is the same. And remember, it's norepinephrine that is actually a neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic cells, that is, the cells that actually stimulate an organ, by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So they have much the same effect, these hormones. What they do, of course, is that they increase the heart rate, they increase the metabolic rate, they increase the blood pressure. And they do that by stimulating vasoconstriction in blood vessel walls. And you may have learned in AP1 when you're studying the autonomic nervous system that the effects of sympathetic stimulation are longer lasting and more generalized, more body-wide than the effects of parasympathetic. And the reason is, first off, we got norepinephrine and epinephrine released directly in the blood by these cells in the adrenal medulla, as well as being released by sympathetic nerve fibers that stimulate various organs. So it's a much more widespread effect. The parasympathetic neurotransmitter is what? What's a neurotransmitter released by parasympathetic fibers in the organs they stimulate? Acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. So it's released to the synapse there. It also happens to be the same neurotransmitter that stimulates contraction of smooth muscle, or excuse me, skeletal muscle. So it's the somatic motor neurons release acetylcholine. And as we saw in the heart, what does acetylcholine do to the heart? It slows down the heart rate. It slows down the heart rate. Okay? Actually, if you dripped it directly on the heart, it would actually reduce the force of contraction as well. And why doesn't it do it to our heart? Why doesn't parasympathetic stimulation reduce the force of contraction in our heart? It just simply slows down the heart rate. Remember why?
Yeah, because of the
Nerve fibers not going
yes,
over there.
You don't have the fibers, yeah. You don't have parasympathetic fibers stimulating the ventricular myocardium. So that really has no effect on the contraction. Okay? And two, at the synapse, okay, there's an enzyme release that breaks down the acetylcholine. Otherwise, for example, when you stimulate smooth muscle or skeletal muscle contraction, and you basically, your neurotransmitter acetylcholine is released, it diffuses across the synaptic plexus, it's picked up by receptors in the muscle cell, that stimulates contraction of the muscle, assuming you got ATP available. What stops that contraction? You know, the neurons are stop secreting the acetylcholine. What stops the contraction?
thyroid. He's talking about a hormone now.
What about an enzyme?
Enzyme.
It's something produced to break down the acetylcholine so it doesn't keep working, called acetylcholinesterase. So that's why the effects of parasympathetic stimulation are short duration. Because they're only released there at the synapses of the parasympathetic fibers, it's not as widespread. Okay? So again, this is the medulla. Chromatin cells produce epinephrine and norepinephrine.
What cells?
Chromatin, and it's on your hand.
Chromatin.
It's on your hand. Okay?
Chromatin.
Chromatin. Okay. See it under adrenal gland,
Yeah,
adrenal hormones, chromatin cells,
and the chromatin cells produce
epinephrine and norepinephrine.
epinephrine.
Okay, the cortex of the adrenal gland is divided into three regions. The outer region, adjacent to the capsule here, is this region. And here, the cells are arranged in little clusters, kind of spherical to oval. If you've got a good imagination like I do, if you look at these cells, look at them carefully, maybe squint a little bit. Okay? You see the cells are little clusters, round to oval, and to me, they look somewhat like the glomerulus of the kidney. So these things like right in here, okay? These are cells of the zone called the zona glomerulosa for that reason. So they sort of look like the glomerulus, the kidney, at least to some people. Have a good imagination. Now these cells produce a class of hormones which regulate ion levels in fluids. These are called mineralocorticoids because your ions are minerals, okay? The major one in humans is a hormone we've talked a lot about already, aldosterone. And what does aldosterone do?
Went over that.
Cause the kidneys to reclaim more sodium ions,
Yes.
and with it more water, builds up the blood volume, and builds up the blood pressure. Okay? So again, if you're asked a class of hormones, mineralocorticoids, if you're asked a specific hormone that is the most abundant mineralocorticoid, your answer should be aldosterone.
And that's an abdominal.
So again, this increasing, okay, it's increasing the reclamation of sodium ions, and thus water, by the blood, building up blood volume, building up blood pressure. Okay? All right, the middle region of the cortex in the adrenal glands, here the cells are arranged in bundles, parallel bundles, called fascicles. Remember when you studied muscle in AP1, muscle fibers or cells often arranged in bundles called fascicles? Or this is what you have here, okay? These roughly parallel bundles. So this is called the zona follicularis. That's the middle region. Or excuse me, the zona fasciculata. The zona fasciculata is the middle region of the adrenal cortex. So zona glomerulosa up here, where the cells are in clumps, clusters, kind of round oval. Here they're in parallel bundles, the zona fasciculata. And the class of hormones here are called glucocorticoids. You can see they stimulate basically breakdown of proteins and lipids. Also gluconeogenesis, which we talked about in lecture. That's the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrates. Also, they aid in the body resisting stress. They basically reduce the inflammatory response and thus the immune response. And sometimes, if you got a skin rash, what do you put on it? Hydrocortisone, which is sort of a dilute solution of cortisol. The cortisol is the major glucocorticoid produced by the human body. And now they got fancy drugs basically that you can take. What they do, of course, is to reduce inflammation. You have all these smiley, happy people, you know, and you can clear up your skin, get rid of that rash and so on, you know, blah, 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 psoriasis and whatever. And then in the fine print, what do they tell you? Check with your doctor first to make sure you do not have a chronic infection like tuberculosis or some fungal infection or something like this. Because if you take these drugs, yes, you'll have beautiful clear skin, but you could die of the infection because it depresses your immune response. So you make a good corpse. You'll have beautiful skin, but you may be dead from some chronic infection that you had. And that's what this drug does, basically. This is what the hormone does. It depresses inflammation or your inflammatory response. Again, it's called cortisol. So the major hormone here, the glucocorticoids in humans, is cortisol. Okay, the inner region of the cortex, right in here, now the cells kind of form like a little network or reticulum. So this is called the zona reticularis. And these cells in both sexes produce androgens, which are male sex hormones, and small amounts of estrogen, again, in both males and females. And in females, when they go through menopause, and the ovaries shut down not only production of eggs, but also production of female sex hormones, the body compensates by taking the androgens that are produced here in the adrenal cortex and converts them to estrogen. This helps to alleviate some of the loss of estrogen. It doesn't make up for the large loss of estrogen, which is produced by the ovaries. That's why when a woman goes through menopause, the so-called change of life, she has some very pronounced symptoms. The hot flashes, the night sweats, the extreme mood swings. Because basically the body is coming off a chemical addiction. The female body has been used to years of heavy doses of estrogen. And now suddenly it's deprived of the estrogen. That's why I have these symptoms.
They never go away, however.
Huh?
They never go away, though.
Well, they do usually
Eventually?
get less. Yeah, they usually get less. In some women it's worse than others. Yeah. Now what they used to do is they advise hormone replacement therapy, where they give you, a lot of female sex hormones. And the danger of that is it can increase your risk of certain types of cancer. So now they're a lot more cautious about hormone replacement therapy. They take very, very low doses. What they do is they encourage the woman to get more exercise, okay, and have a diet high in calcium. Okay? Because remember, one of the things that your sex hormones do, both male and female, is what? In regard to the bones. What do?
They protect you from...
They maintain your bone matrix, the energetic bone matrix. That's why women, when they go through menopause, are much higher risk for bone degenerative diseases like osteoporosis, because the levels of estrogens have fallen off precipitously. So she's much more prone to have problems with bone loss. This occurs earlier in females, okay, usually in the 40s they start losing bone, than in males. Males don't actually go through menopause, okay? They start gradually producing less and less male sex hormones, but they don't have a precipitous drop like females, okay? So they're less prone to bone loss until much later in life, maybe in their 60s or so. So like I say, males don't have physiological menopause, maybe psychological menopause, okay? They ditch their wife, pick up another, hot blonde, and then drive around. Middle-aged crazy. But again, eventually as we get older, and we produce fewer sex hormones, we become more prone to bone degenerative diseases.
Yep.
Males are less prone to, because they generally have higher or heavier skeletons to begin with. Okay? So the people that are highest risk are Caucasian, petite females, postmenopausal. Those are the ones most likely to have problems with osteoporosis. So when you're young.
So if you're good and fat, you don't have to worry as
Well,
much
that's
about
what
it.
it is. And then if you're a little overweight, okay, you're probably a stronger skeleton. But you may die of a stroke or heart attack. Or of a nice strong skeleton, okay? So like I said, it's the petite females, especially those that are very slim, okay, are at highest risk. And for some reason, it's higher in Caucasians than other
They
ethnicities.
die first in the family.
Huh?
They die first in the family.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions on this? Okay.
Well, the bottom
Right here?
reaching, yes.
That again, you're looking at the medulla. And here you're talking about the chromatin cells producing epinephrine and all that. And so you can just go through this from one side to the other.
Okay,
Here's the
'cause I
medulla
thought we
again.
were still at the bottom of it.
What?
Yes, please.
No, we're going through the organ. There's the medulla. Here again is the zona reticularis of the cortex. Here again is the zona fasciculata here. Okay? And then here again is the zona glomerulus. And here's the capsule again. So we're just going through the organ, one side to the other.
Okay, yeah, okay. That was
Do
confusing.
we need to be able to identify a chromatin cell?
No, if I point that area, okay,
Okay.
say, that's the cell type, you say chromatin cells. What's the hormone? You would say